Okay, so good morning. So a note about what what this is today. It is a bonus lecture. I'm not going to test you on any of this. There's no quiz, there's no reading response on this, but this is where philosophy has ended up, and these are some of the most important philosophers of the 20th and 21st century. And if you want to have a kind of relevant understanding of what's going on in philosophy, this lecture will point the way, or at least introduce you, because I am not even going to pretend that this is going to be a comprehensive or overview of the some of the greatest minds of the 20th and 21st century. So this the purpose of this, and this is a little bit different from what I generally do. I generally start with a question, and then, we will talk about specific philosophers, but I want to give you a taste of what, these philosophers are doing and the direction that philosophy has gone of late. And I am going to coalesce around a single question today, and that is an important question. What does it mean to be human? What you think right? But maybe we don't, and maybe we're becoming something different. And so, really, today, the topic is posthumanism, and this is a philosophical movement that thinks beyond the category of human-centered thinking. Posthumanism refers to a large body of thought that rejects humanism, that rejects this idea that humans are exceptional, that we are the point of everything. And think about that for a moment. That all of this, the 4 billion plus years of the Earth, 13 plus billion years of the universe, all of this culminated in, yay, us. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe that just isn't the way it is. Maybe we need a new way of thinking about who we are and what we're doing here. And so posthumanism aims to deconstruct the privileged position of humanity by showing how humans, nature, and technology are interconnected. And there are a variety of different responses to this, and some of them get enormously complex. So, again, my intention is not that you leave this lecture with a competent understanding of Deleuze or Derrida or Foucault or any of the thinkers we're going to think about or talk about, but I want to introduce you to them. And even if you don't understand completely what they're saying, and you won't, I want you to see the general movement of philosophy, and you will be able to pick up on that very easily. All right. So posthumanism includes a wide variety of interpretations and theories. To simplify the topic, I've divided this lecture into 4 parts. Humanism, what is it? Well, we're kind of familiar with humanism, but we'll talk about it. What is humanism? Then there is a response to humanism that is kind of best described as anti-humanism. The work of Nietzsche, going all the way back to Spinoza, there are anti-humanists. There are people who say, hey, humanism was a mistake. Then the post-humanists. And finally, we're going to talk about technological posthumanism, which some people refer to as transhumanism. And this is a more optimistic view of harnessing technology to become something different than we are. And so these are the 4 topics, really. So posthumanism in a nutshell, really, if we want to make it into a bumper sticker, and why wouldn't we, after all? And the theme of this course, or the theme of this lecture, is maybe human beings are just not that special after all. You might be thinking that in the back of your head when you look at everything that's going on. Maybe it's not all about us. Maybe we aren't at the center of all of this after all. Maybe this is not just our story. So maybe there's something different going on. And that is really where most of these philosophers are coming from. There was a writer named Ibn Hassan who was very prescient in thinking about these post-humanistic themes. And he was actually the first scholar to use the term post-human. And he suggested that the human self was no longer a stable central entity, but was fragmented, fluid, and interwoven with machines and networks. And this is the theme of posthumanism, particularly when we think about technology and the way that humans interact with technology. And some philosophers have said that technology has changed humanity so much that what we used to think of as human just really is no longer relevant. And we've become something entirely different as we've integrated technology into our lives. I think that is a persuasive argument. Whatever it was that developed out there on the Paleolithic plains, as soon as humans started to harness technology, we became something different. What exactly is it? Interesting question. So he was the first real writer to pose the question at the core of this lecture. Will technology ultimately free humanity? Will we become better? Or will it make humans, in the traditional sense, obsolete? Will post-human technologies lead to the end of our species as we know it? And there is a distinct possibility that might happen. Or maybe it has already happened. Other important philosophical questions that will arise over the course of this lecture. What actually does it mean to be human? Is human identity completely tied to biology? Or can we extend humanity through technology and artificial intelligence to become something better than we are? What happens if humans merge with machines? What does that mean? At what point do you stop becoming human in the traditional sense? I would argue that this thing right here, this is, we'll talk about the concept of a cyborg that is a human that is part machine and part biologically human. I would say we're already there. Because I don't go anywhere without my phone, and I have access to all of this information, and it changes the way that I process information, and it changes the way that I think, right? Think about if we could upload our minds, right? We've talked about this when we talked about the nature of the self. What if we could just upload or download our minds onto a chip or something like that, some kind of digital storage media? Is that me? Is it the same person? Or are we creating a generation of godlike intelligences, and what are their relation to us? Even if it is me, if it's not constrained by the body, if it's not constrained by the limitations of being embodied in the world, well, what is it exactly? If post-human intelligence surpasses human intelligence, which I have no doubt that it will, why will humans be relevant? In what way will post-human entities find meaning in their own existence? And that's a super interesting question. I always like to read, it did come up, but will these beings have religion? Will they have some type of spirituality? How will they think about themselves in the world, and how will they think about us? I hope you find these questions exciting as I do. So we have to start with humanism. And this is a very easy concept. We all know it because this is how we think about ourselves and how we've been conditioned to think about ourselves, at least since the Renaissance, and probably far earlier, going back to the Greeks and the Romans. And humanism is the philosophical stance that emphasizes human agency and autonomy, right? Reason, autonomy, agency, individuality, all of that is a consequence of humanism. It puts humans at the center of the world. It recognizes the importance of the individual, whom is the starting point for serious moral and philosophical conversation, at least in the West, where humanism is the most dominant philosophy. I mean, there are other types of society that are more communitarian, but in the West, we are definitely humanistic. Humanism emphasizes reason and rationality as the prime method of problem solving. So you think of science and the scientific revolution. All of that was predicated on this idea of, freedom of thought and freedom of inquiry and the individual and the importance of individualism. And of course, politically, what did we just talk about? We talked about political liberalism. I hope that you could see that political liberalism is the natural political articulation of humanism, right? It's a humanistic type of political organization that puts the individual at the center, the human individual. Like morally, politically, philosophically, we are at the center of everything. Now, today, humanism is often viewed as a purely secular, non-religious movement, but the concept of humanism does owe much to medieval Christianity, concerning the universal dignity of human beings, individual freedom, and the idea that God became human in order to redeem humanity. So a lot of humanistic thinkers really, humanism was shaped in a religious context. Even though humanism today is generally thought to be non-religious, there is a definite connection, a foundational connection between humanism and early Christianity. Even the idea of individual salvation is a very kind of humanistic idea, right? That I have a personal relationship with God and God, intervenes in my life. Again, who's at the center of this? Me, humanity, right? Now, during the Enlightenment humanists drew upon classical ideas, but with a more secular focus. They believed that humans could use their intellect to improve society through rational thought. We've seen a lot of these thinkers. And there was a belief in the inherent worth and capabilities of human beings, promoting critical thinking and societal reform based on these principles. And we've seen a lot of thinkers who were humanistic thinkers, right? Locke. We didn't talk about Montesquieu, but we talked about Rousseau, Diderot, Hume, Adam Smith. These were all humanist thinkers. Kant, right? What do they all have in common? They emphasized autonomy. They emphasized individuality, freedom of conscience, freedom of thought, reason, individual liberty, and progress. This idea of progress. Think about what an unusual idea progress is. Like, you probably believe that the world is meant to get better, right? That we're making progress, that humans apply their reason and their power of understanding to the world, and we improve it year after year, and society should get better. That's a new idea. Ancient people did not have that idea. They did not. The idea that society would improve, that's a revolutionary idea, and we take that for granted. Why? Humanism, right? And when things don't get better, people get angry. In the ancient world, no one thought things would get better. It would always be the same. Very fatalistic, right? Things might get worse. There was a war or a plague or a famine, but no one thought, oh, we're going to wake up our children will have a better world. I think all of you probably would believe, well, our children should have a better world. And if they don't, you be angry and upset. You're like, this is wrong. That's humanism. That's how that's how insinuated this philosophy is to our mentality, to the way that we think about the world, right? Here we have Locke. All men by nature are equal, in that equal right that every man hath to his natural freedom without being subjected to the will or authority of any other man, being equal and independent. No one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. Humanism, straight humanism. Humans are at the center, the individual is at the center, individuals have rights. The state or any other entity shouldn't interfere with those rights. That's humanism. Humans are number one. Yay, humans. Now, contemporary humanism. Contemporary humanists assert that humans are responsible for their own development and their own progress, but they believe that reason and science can help people create a better world. Humanists support democracy, the rule of law, the idea of universal human rights and freedoms. Again, we take most of this for granted. We just assume this is the way the world is and has always been. But that is not the case. This is a revolutionary new idea, really kind of arose over time and culminated in the Renaissance and the revolutions of the American Revolution and the French Revolution and all of that stuff, right? Who could disagree with this? Who would challenge this? Well, there's something called the anti-humanists. Anti-humanism. Now, before you get all worked up, like, what are they mad at humans? No, not at all. The anti-humanists simply deny that humans are special. Okay, so don't get all worked up that they somehow hate, they're misanthropic or something. They're not. No, they simply say, wait a minute. All of this putting human beings on a pedestal, humans really aren't any different than any other type of anything else in nature. There's nothing that makes us special. And even reason, the power of reason and all of that stuff, that, okay. I mean, really? So anti-humanists deny that humans possess some special faculty or attribute, reason, intelligence, consciousness, moral autonomy that differentiates them from all other forms of life. We're really not that special. So they argue that the idea of human nature should be rejected as historically relative. Humans have no special faculties or characteristics that warrant special consideration. Yeah, I mean, we're just part of nature. We're just another part of nature. So the rise of anti-humanists. And so here we're going to think about four major thinkers: Spinoza, Nietzsche, Foucault, and Derrida. And Foucault and Derrida they're both dead, but they were, if you're old enough, they were alive at some point in your life. Spinoza, of course, and Nietzsche, long dead. But these are our four main anti-humanists. Again, do they hate human beings? No. Do they think human beings are special? Also, no. Spinoza is a fascinating philosopher. More people should read Spinoza. He lived from 1632 to 1677, and he was way ahead of his time. And he was a pantheist. He believed that he was accused of being an atheist, but he's really a pantheist. He believed that everything was God, and God was everywhere. Spinoza challenged this idea that humans were special and had a special place in the universe. Human beings, like everything else in nature, are governed by mechanistic laws. We're not exceptions to the rules of physics and the laws of nature. We're just like everything else. We have, in fact, no autonomy, no free will. We're machines, like everything else is a machine. We are subject to the same natural laws as everything else. There is no higher purpose to our life. Sorry. We're just another part of nature. And we're subject to all the laws of causality that everything else is. Human dignity comes not from asserting superiority over nature. No, that's not what gives us dignity, but rather understanding our place within nature. We are not above nature. Nobody appointed us as guardian of the universe. We are just a part of nature, and we should accept that and reconcile ourselves to that fact. We would do much better, right, as a species, if we recognized that we were just one species out of many. This is good stuff, right? Nietzsche. Now, there's almost no philosopher historically that is as misunderstood and misapplied as Nietzsche. Part of that is Nietzsche's fault, because he was a fantastic writer, but he loved the rhetorical flourishes, and he also wrote in character. He would write as a protagonist in a kind of, you know, in a kind of way. You know, he would take different positions and then just see where they ended up. And so it's easy to get lost in Nietzsche's rhetorical style, but underneath there is a consistent and coherent philosophy that is rooted in anti-humanism. Now, Nietzsche goes to the heart of this question. Remember, for the humanist, what makes us special is our rationality, right? That's why we rule the universe, is because we're so smart. Nietzsche says, not so fast. Rationality is not the defining characteristic of humanity. It's not. We are just like every other animal. And so the Enlightenment emphasis on reason and dignity are rooted in a denial of what we really are. We are animals. I mean that in the most naturalistic sense. There is nothing that separates humans from other animals. Yes, we're more sophisticated and more social in some ways, and we use tools better. But when it comes down to it, we are motivated by the same animistic forces as everything else in nature. And so what is this principle that animates organisms in nature? Well, Nietzsche calls it the will to power. And this is an idea that he takes kind of from Schopenhauer. The will to assert and enhance our own existence. And this is the dynamic force that drives all living organisms. To survive, to thrive, to expand, in some cases to dominate and control, but basically just to stay alive. And that is the most fundamental drive in our species, like every other species. And to pretend that we're different, to pretend that there's some reified sense of reason that motivates us to do, create art and all of these, culture and all. No, at bottom, we just like every other organism are trying to survive and make the most of our existence. This is the will to power. Now, the problem for Nietzsche was a problem of meaning. That is that the Enlightenment had killed God, and Nietzsche thought this was actually a bad thing. What do I mean that the Enlightenment killed God? Well, think about science, and for some people, there's a conflict today between science and religion, and think about the nature of that conflict. Why do people think there's a conflict between science and religion? Well, once upon a time, when people wanted to explain who they were or where the universe came from, or why people got sick, or why, there was a weather cycle, or why there was an earthquake, what was the answer for ancient peoples? The gods, right? And so religion was an integral part of human life. And people got meaning. That's how we knew who we were. That's where our sense of identity came from. That's where our sense of purpose came from. But along comes Galileo. Galileo says, the Earth isn't the center of the universe. Along comes Darwin, who says, oh, we're just descended from animals like everything else. Wait a minute. What happened to the explanatory power of God? Well, science displaces it. We don't need those stories anymore because we can understand physics. We can understand chemistry. We have reason. We don't need superstition. We don't need to huddle together in the dark because there's terrible forces at work. No, we don't need any of that. We have science and we have progress. Nietzsche says this creates a crisis. Yeah, in some ways it improves our life. We don't die from disease, and we have other types of science, and I guess that's good, right? But on the other hand, there was no longer a foundation for ethical or religious values. And so when we thought about the question, who are we and what does it mean? There was no answer. Science does not give us an answer when we ask the question, who are we? And so when religion dies, when God dies, all that is left is a void. And Nietzsche thought this was disastrous, right? And so Nietzsche thought that we could all descend into nihilism, and nihilism was the worst possible outcome, a sense of meaninglessness, a dark void of nothingness, where there are no values, there are no ethics, there is no art, there is no culture, because there's no reason to create any of that. And so this was a crisis, Nietzsche said. And we must respond to this crisis in a new way. Humanity must rebuild a value system that can transcend good and evil, the traditional, because that stuff doesn't make sense anymore after science. So we must go beyond conventional morality because the foundation of conventional morality has disappeared. What's the solution? We must learn to create our own values. We must learn to create our own value. Nietzsche imagined a future. So in a way, he's one of the first post-humanists because he imagines a post-human future, right? Where superior beings called the Ubermensch or the Overman could abandon the traditional herd morality and live authentically by creating their own values. Humanism is an obstacle to this evolution because of the way it removes humans from nature and institutionalizes reward and punishment. You have to think beyond those categories. You have to be the kind of person that is capable of creating their own values. And this, Nietzsche thought, was a more authentic way to live. Now, you could probably see, at least I hope you can see, how easily such a philosophy could be misinterpreted and misapplied. And so when we think about Nietzsche or we see references to Nietzsche, I hope that you understand that the Ubermensch has not arrived. It is a new way of being human. It is something that Nietzsche imagines for humans of the future will have to become these tremendous beings capable of generating their own meaning. Not that there's any group of people who actually do this now. So the Übermensch, or the Overman, who has organized the chaos of his passions, given style to his character, and become creative. The artist, right? The person who creates their own culture, their own meaning. Aware of life's terrors, he affirms life without resentment. He accepts life for what it is. He doesn't need mythology, or she, right? They don't need mythology. They don't need superstition. They don't need stories, because they can face life for exactly what it is and affirm life and create their own value. And again, this is pretty heady stuff. And it's easy to misunderstand and misapply this, right? So we want to be on our guard about that. And many people have. Michel Foucault. Foucault is a fascinating person. Also rejects humanism, or the basic underlining premise of humanism. He doesn't see human or man, the category of man or human, as a stable universal category at all. We're not like that. Humanity is a modern invention that will eventually be replaced. It's just a word. It's a descriptive. We're not stable. We're not rational beings. We're none of that. These are just modern ideas. And these ideas will be replaced eventually. So the human subject is not a stable, self-determining entity. It's just the product of a particular time and a particular place and a particular history and a particular way of talking. So when we talk about human nature, that's just a product of our particular historical, cultural perspective. There's nothing universal there. What humans are is always a product of culture. It's always a product of how words are used. It is not something that transcends nature. We're a product of nature. And again, if you're seeing this theme in the humanists, the anti-humanists are essentially saying, you know what? Whatever humanity is, it's just a part of nature. It's nothing special about it. Now, Foucault was interesting because remember that the humanists see reason as the engine of progress. Rationality is the thing that makes humans special. But Foucault says the assumption that reason and knowledge is always a mean to human progress is a lie. What do we use reason for? What do we use our knowledge for, really? What do we do with it? Think about this question. It's a powerful question. The humanists say we use reason to improve the world. Foucault says, no, we use reason to control others. Reason is a tool, knowledge is a tool, and it's used as a mechanism of control. And that's what societies are all about. The humanists point to, well, look at all these advanced industrial societies and all the institutions that we create. Foucault says, look at those institutions. You know what they're about? They're about control. They're not about freedom. They're not about liberation. They're about control. They're about power and asserting power over you. And all institutions use knowledge to do this. social institutions shape and control individuals through language, through rules, through particular practices, through vocabulary. Foucault argues that institutions use reason to justify new forms of surveillance and discipline rather than giving people freedom. Institutions don't free you, they control you, they regiment you, they segregate you. That's what institutions do. They put you in a category and then they watch you. And if you try to transcend that category, what do? They punish you. And Foucault would know this because Foucault was a gay man who lived until the 1980s. And he knew all about the price that you had to pay if you violated the norms of the institution, if you transcended a category, what would happen to you as the institution would try to rigidly put you back in your place and punish you if you didn't conform. That's what reason is used for. That's what knowledge is used for. Oh, Dylan says knowledge is power. Yes, right. Francis Bacon said that, but Foucault says it again and throws it back at Bacon. Knowledge is power. What does that mean? How do we use power? We use power for control, right? Not to liberate, not to free, but to control. Foucault's quote here, schools serve the same social functions as prisons. And mental institutions. They define you, they classify you, they control you, and they regulate you. And everything is okay as long as you stay inside the lines. But when you try to go outside and do something, you're punished for that. Wow. Derrida. And again, I apologize. We're doing this rapid kind of machine, the greatest hits album of contemporary philosophy. But again, this is an introduction. If you're interested, pursue these thinkers on your own. This is a taste. I'm giving you a little taste of what's going on in this conversation, just enough to whet your appetite. The real work is up to you, right? To pursue these questions and these thinkers, and to really you can spend a lifetime trying to understand any one of these thinkers. Derrida is one of the most controversial philosophers of all time. And when I was in grad school, it's very exciting. Derrida was a really big deal, not so much in philosophy departments, but in English departments, because Derrida focused on the way that we use language. And so his critique of humanism is really he attacks, or I wouldn't say he attacks humanism, but he undermines the foundation of humanism through a method he called deconstruction. And you guys have probably heard about deconstruction. So we're going to talk a little bit about what deconstruction means, and post-structuralism movements and postmodern philosophers and deconstruction. There's a lot of people involved here, but I'm going to give you a taste, a little taste, and an amuse-bouche, right? Just to whet your palate for what's to come if you really want to go down the rabbit hole on your own. So deconstruction challenges the stability of meaning and language. That's what's going on. We think words refer to something. Remember, we talked about that. Words have meaning because they refer to something real in the world. Not for Derrida. For Derrida, meaning is never fixed. It's never stable. And so words aren't stable. And so deconstruction works by exposing the internal contradictions and assumptions within any language. And I don't just mean written words or spoken words. We're talking about ideas, institutions, systems, philosophy, all of that stuff. None of it is stable. We pretend it's stable. We pretend there's boundaries. We pretend there's lines, but there's not. Everything is unstable. Everything is kind of just floating around. We're trying to make sense of it, but we can't because meaning is inherently unstable. So humanism has traditionally privileged reason, right? That's the whole thing behind humanism. Rationality, reason. That's the foundation of meaning and truth. But Derrida says, no, that's not how it works. Belief in a fixed singular meaning is an illusion. Any word, any definition, it has multiple meanings. It's nuanced. It's unstable. Belief in a singular meaning is an illusion. Language and concepts are always shifting. The lines are always blurring. Meaning is dependent on difference. It's not dependent on a stable foundation. We always define things in terms of what they're not. And that makes meaning inherently unstable. So we can't build a foundation in the way that the humanists thought we could. We can't build a philosophy. We can't do what Descartes was trying to do. We never get a stable foundation for anything we're trying to do. It's always in flux. It's always shifting. Our understanding is always evolving. That's very frightening. Okay, I want to just take a deep breath here and realize the implications of what Derrida is saying. Every institution, every practice, every discourse, every thought, every idea, every philosophy, we try to pretend that it's built on a stable foundation. And we can count on that stable foundation. Derrida says that's an illusion. Nothing is stable. I'm going to ask, let me just ask you this question. Can you live in a world where nothing is stable? I mean, that's a genuine question. I want you to ask yourself that question. Or do you need to believe that there's some solid foundation out there that you can rest on? Now, if you said, yes, I can live in a world where everything is in flux, where there's no definitive meaning for anything. Let me step back for a moment and talk about something that's mildly controversial today. Think about gender. Do you think that gender is fixed? Do you think that gender is determined by nature? Or do you think that gender is fluid and people can express their gender in a variety of ways? Well, there you go. Like, what are you more comfortable with? A world in which sexual and gender roles are definitively described and rigorously applied and foundational, or a world in which, it's constantly changing and evolving, and then we have to remember all those pronouns and things like that, and people get upset about that. This is the kind of thing that Derrida, I mean, he's not like addressing this directly, but apply that to everything. Everything is in flux. Nothing is strictly determined. Now you can see perhaps why people resist so adamantly against things like deconstruction, right? I've always told my son that the only thing that is constant is change. Well, Dylan, you seem to be someone that might be comfortable in in Derrida's world. Not everyone is. Right? So humanism relies on unstable binaries where one term is privileged over another. And think about the history of Western philosophy. Reason more important than emotion. Humans superior to nature. Derrida says this is impossible to do. You can't even do this. You have to displace these binaries. Male, female doesn't make sense. Our existence, our actual existence in the world is far more nuanced than any concept or word could convey. And so the word is always breaking, right? When we try to fit something into that, it's always breaking apart. It's always unstable. So, for example, right, humanism, think of philosophy, and we've talked about Plato. Speech is privileged over writing. Why? Because speech is direct. Speech is closer to the truth. Like this is what Plato taught. Writing was kind of an imitation. Speech comes directly from the speaker's mouth, so it should be privileged over writing. Writing, on the other hand, is seen as derivative, secondary, or even corrupting in the philosophical tradition. Derrida says no. He deconstructs this boundary. He says that writing is not merely a copy of speech, it has its own structure, it has its own meaning, independent of what the speaker said. Also, the meaning in both speech and writing is never fully stable, but it's constantly deferred through an endless chain of signs. We never get to the real original meaning because there is no real original meaning. There is only interpretation after interpretation after interpretation after interpretation. So we never get to the ultimate meaning. The way that Derrida puts this is that meaning is always deferred. It's something that we try to get to, but we never quite get there. Concepts like freedom, autonomy, and equality don't have a single definitive meaning. Each of those words contains ambiguities and contradictions that make them inherently open to multiple interpretations. What does freedom mean? Good luck with that. What does autonomy mean? Good luck with that. What does equality mean? Good luck with that. Why? Because those concepts, those ideas don't have a single definitive meaning. In fact, they contain contradictions. We know this going all the way back to Hegel, that an idea like freedom contains kind of contradictions. Words like freedom and equality are inherently open to multiple interpretations. Text can even undermine their own claim, producing meanings beyond the author's intent. There is no final authoritative reading, only an ongoing play of meanings. And of course, when Derrida says text, he's talking about anything. Institutions, ideas, philosophies, books, words, films, poems, conversation. There's no final authoritative reading. There is only a play of meanings that is always deferred into the future in some way. Everybody doing okay with this? I hope so, because now we're going to move into contemporary posthumanism. Yeah. All right. Like the anti-humanists, post-humanist philosophers also challenge the idea that humans are the ultimate source of meaning or value. But they move beyond anti-humanism a little bit. And it's hard to put people into categories, right? Like the anti-humanist, post-humanist philosophers also challenge the idea that humans are at the center of the story. But they move beyond anti-humanism by exploring how humans are interconnected with technology and the environment. So for the post-humanist, it's more, what is humanity becoming? Post-humanism envisions what comes after humanity, often in the context of technological or ecological transformation. So whatever humanity is or was, it's becoming something different. What is that? How can we describe it? All right. Post-humanist philosophers raise questions about technology, the relationship between humans and technology. Many write about the possibility of humans transcending their biological limitations and integrating with technology in a way that I would argue we already are. If you have a smartphone, you're already integrated with technology. You are way different than your ancestors. I would argue that you're categorically different than somebody who was raised in, like I was in the 1980s and you know, in the 1990s. Like, no, this is different, almost a different species. Like social media, information platforms, they're changing who we are. And what are the potential dangers of this? Gilles Deleuze. Okay. Now we're really, I mean, if you're in a conversation, yeah, you can talk about Derrida, Nietzsche, and stuff, but like if you're quoting Deleuze, then you're like, okay, that's next level. You're at the next level. You've moved on to the next level, and I hope that you guys, you take some of this and well, you can spend hours and hours and hours reading Deleuze and reading about Deleuze and his intellectual partners. But Deleuze, like his anti-humanist predecessors, he rejects the idea of a unified rational subject as the foundation of our identity. And this is a theme that you're getting with all of these thinkers. We aren't just one thing. And in fact, words and categories and philosophies may not be able to describe exactly what we are in the way that the humanists thought that was possible. Now, Deleuze goes even further. He says that subjectivity, our subjectivity, is produced through an assemblage, or what he calls a machine, but that's a kind of misleading term. But our identity is always relational. And this is a major concept for Deleuze. We are not individuals. Whatever we are arises from our relationships with the people around us and the things around us and nature itself. So you have to look at whatever humans are, it's a system. And it's an interdependent system that is constantly interacting with its environment. I know this is very abstract, but there is no real individual here. What it means to be human, whatever it means to be human, is an assemblage of different processes that are going on, right, with everything around us in our environment. And so that's the way I want you to think about Deleuze. So, like, it's things aren't linear. Things are interconnected in a way that's fundamental. Individuals are always in the process of becoming in the context of larger external forces or other machines. So I want you to think about a machine in the sense that a machine is just a complex system that is operating with individual parts that are interdependent, right? The term that Deleuze uses is we are machines of desire. And again, this is misleading. The concept of machine is misleading, but you want to think of a machine as a complex system of interdependent parts. Yes, we are part of a complex system. But what about desire? Humanism sees desire as an emptiness that needs to be filled. That's not how Deleuze sees desire. It's not that there's some kind of hole in us that needs to be filled by something external. Humans are not self-contained autonomous beings. We are always part of a larger system. So desire is the creative force in the universe that links these different parts together. We come together because we want to come together with these other things. So we are machines of desire. We are part of this vast, interconnected complex of things that are brought together by desire. So let me give you an example. The mouth is a machine. It can't be understood in isolation from the body or from the food system, but it is, we can identify it and we can talk about it, right? So the mouth is a machine. It connects with food. Food is another machine. It connects with digestion, which is another machine. So you have all these different parts of the system operating together, and they're interdependent. The act of eating is not just satisfying hunger, it's part of a continuous productive process. And that's just one example. We are constantly in this web of interconnected, continuous productive processes. And that's what we are. So these desiring machines are constantly interacting with economics, technology, and nature. And so the boundary between what is human, what is animal, and what is machine completely dissolves. It makes no sense to set up boundaries between different parts of the system because the system is holistic. Everything is working together. And so desire, the machine is also, these machines are also expanding. This whole system is expanding. So it constantly escapes control. It seeks new connections beyond the rigid structures imposed by society. So whenever we try to categorize something, like go back to what Foucault says, we're limiting it. Whenever we try to put something in a box, we're misunderstanding what it is. So when we give definitions or rigid definitions or categories or boundaries, that's in a way undermining what we are. Right? All right, trees and rhizomes. Okay, so the traditional philosophic approach to knowledge treats knowledge as a kind of hierarchy. So think of a tree. You have a trunk, and the trunk branches out into different families of ideas. This is a kind of hierarchy. Truth comes from a foundational principle with a single origin and has clear branches and categories. But the tree model falsely assumes that knowledge has a stable origin and linear development, and it imposes rigid structures and fixed identities on reality, right? And that's not going to work. So for Deleuze, and I should also mention Guattari, Felix Guattari, who is, and I mean, we just don't have enough room to put everybody here, but Guattari was essential in as a co-author for a lot of Deleuze's work. So Deleuze and Guattari, knowledge is a rhizome, right? A rhizome. It's a system. It's a system in which any point can connect to any other point. And there's no single origin, no center, no top-down hierarchy. So ideas and identities and cultural practices emerge through fluid, constantly shifting connections among many elements rather than through a hierarchical, authoritative structure. And this idea of the rhizome is really central to Deleuze's concept of knowledge. So humans can only escape traditional systems of oppression and hierarchy. That is, when people are putting us in a box, or people are putting rigid lines about what we are and what we can be, or what we should do, or what we shouldn't do. We can escape that by embracing multiplicity, non-human agency, and the recognition of the interconnectedness of all forms of existence. Deleuze envisions a post-human ethics of becoming where our identity is fluid. It's not fixed. It's always expanding. It's always becoming something else. And that's just the way systems operate in nature. Nothing is linear. Nothing fits into a nice little box, right? Nature is amorphous. These interconnected machines of desires are always morphing into something else, always changing. And so we should abandon any fixed notion of what we are and accept the multiplicity of the universe. Fascinating. And again, even if you guys aren't getting the details, I hope you're getting the sense of the direction of where philosophers have gone with this question. Good quote from Deleuze here. The self is only a threshold, a door, a becoming between two multiplicities. That is a great idea. The self is a doorway between two different realities, two different multiplicities, two different systems. You move through a doorway, right? It's not fixed, it's not stable. I love that. I think that's a really interesting idea. The self is a doorway. Jean Baudrillard. Baudrillard is an interesting thinker who thought a lot about technology and how technology was changing us. And Baudrillard specifically was interested in media and media simulations. Baudrillard argues that the modern individual has dissolved into a system of media simulations. So we aren't autonomous agents anymore. We may have never been, but now we are actually constructed by the media we consume. So we live our life constantly surrounded by media and by advertising. And so that becomes our identity. And Baudrillard calls this hyper reality. We live in a world that is more real than the real. This world created by the media that surrounds us. And again, he was born in 1929 and he died in 2007. Baudrillard is like, in some ways, he's one of the most prescient of all the philosophers when he talks about hyperreality. Baudrillard says simulations of reality have become more real than reality itself. What does he mean by that? Well, think about Disneyland. Most of you probably have been to Disneyland, or at least you know what it's all about. There are adults who love Disneyland, right? I'm not against Disneyland, but on the other hand, I think it's a great place to go with kids. I don't know if it would be a vacation destination for just me and my wife, but whatever, right? Disneyland is not reality. Everybody knows that. It's a simulation of reality, though. But it's a simulation of reality that becomes more real than reality itself for many people. It is a world of pure escapism and happiness. Wouldn't you like to live in a world where everything worked out, where everything was happy all the time, where there was no sadness, where there was no suffering, where there was no death? Well, you can't. Disney has created that world for you. You can choose to live in it. Life-size plastic animals satisfy our curiosity about nature. The buildings replicate a cartoonish cinematic aesthetic to foster the illusion of our own childishness. The simulation is more real than the reality. Okay, but it gets worse. This is where we really go down the rabbit hole. Baudrillard claims that Disneyland is presented as imaginary. And of course, everybody knows that Disneyland is imaginary, right? Even those people who are immersed completely in the simulacra of Disneyland, they understand at some level that it's imaginary, but Disneyland itself is presented as imaginary in order to make us believe that everything else is real, that everything we experience outside the park is actually real. But that is not the case. Modern society itself is saturated with simulations, media spectacle, advertising images, and political theater. And folks, remember, Baudrillard did not live to see the world that we are immersed in today. Okay, again, very, very prescient. Thus, Disneyland works as a mask. It helps maintain the illusion that reality still exists somewhere outside the system of the simulation. But everything in our world is, in fact, a simulation. In a world dominated by simulations, there is no reality. There is nothing for you to anchor your sense of self to, because everything is not real. And again, think about the phone. If the phone mediates every aspect of your social life, your understanding of what's going on in the world, how is there a stable reality for you to anchor yourself to? There's not. The simulated reality is reality. And so instead of being active meaning makers, humans have become passive consumers of signs and images that do not correspond to anything that is real. Think about politics. People insulate themselves in a world of essentially simulation, where they hear only the information they want to hear. And a lot of that information is just made up, but that doesn't matter. because the simulated world is more real than the real world. As technology gets better and better, Baudrillard said that human beings themselves will be replaced by artificial systems that operate without them. So the world will no longer require human interpretation. It will function as a self-perpetuating network of science and media simulations. So the simulations will become so good that we don't need humans to participate in them. That's okay, Francis. That's crazy. Baudrillard is fun. Donna Haraway. Now, Donna Haraway, a little more down to earth. She's a technologist and philosopher, and she uses the metaphor of the cyborg. A cyborg is an organism that is part machine and part human. And Haraway points out that humans have been cyborgs for a while. This is not something that's going to happen in the future. It's something that has already happened. We have integrated technology into ourselves to such a point we are entirely dependent upon it. And if we're dependent upon technology to that extent, we are technological beings. We are post-human already. I can't live without my phone. I don't think I could function with it. It is an extension, and I don't mean this in a bad way. I see it as augmenting my cognitive capabilities. I have access to all the information out in the world. I have access to, 10,000 years of literature, not literature, but art, 4,000 years of literature. Yeah, no, I right at my fingertips, I have access to all of the stuff that I need and I use. I can know exactly what's going on anywhere in the world. I'm a cyborg in a way that Haraway says. So we've transcended the binary opposition between human and machine, between nature and culture, and male and female. It doesn't matter anymore. None of that matters. There was a time when maybe it didn't matter. Look, there was a time when your gender probably mattered. It doesn't anymore. There was a time when the distinction between nature and culture mattered, but it doesn't anymore. Technology has erased the boundaries between all of these categories, and these categories don't even make sense anymore. What is the difference between humanity and machines? We're integrated. Doesn't matter. Haraway said by the late 20th century, our time, a mythic time, we are all chimeras, right? The chimera was a mythical animal that was made up of a variety of different types of animals. It had a lion's body and the tail of a snake and the head of an eagle, right? Theorized and fabricated hybrids of machine and organism. In short, we are all cyborgs already. That's what we are. As our lives become increasingly mediated by technology, will we become more and more cyborgian? We will become a fragmented, constructed self that escapes rigid social categories. Words, categories don't matter anymore in practice. And because our knowledge is always partial and shaped by our position in society, Haraway calls for a new kind of politics. We need a new kind of politics to reflect this. Such a politics should embrace hybridity, partial identities, and coalition building rather than seeking a universal or objective foundation. We're expanding, we're not contracting. And so it's like, what do people need? Well, it depends on who they are and where they are in society and what they're becoming. Like Whitman said, I contain multitudes, and technology allows me to inhabit those multitudes in a way that is very direct. And so politics and society must reflect that. And isn't it funny how we still try to push everybody into these rigid categories because that's what we're comfortable with? It doesn't work anymore. And the more that we try to push people into rigid categories, technology just explodes that and allows you to become, not only become anything that you want to become, you become many things simultaneously. Some things that are contradictory. But that's just the power of technology. And we should recognize that. That can't be controlled. Now, this brings us to something called technological posthumanism. And this is posthumanism that focuses on how technology has changed us and is changing us and will change us. Some posthumanists believe that the unified, rational human subject may be wiped out by technology. I think that's probably true. The future successors of the human race could be radically alien and different. I believe that is also true. These beings could completely cease to be human. This could lead to a radical restructuring of the values inherent in the present social order. I think that's inevitable. Unless we destroy ourselves with some kind of nuclear exchange, or we destroy the ecosystem of the planet irrevocably, I think this is exactly where we're going. Now, this brings us to something called transhumanism. Now, I will say that, like, these are relatively new descriptors, and so not everybody agrees on exactly what posthumanism means and transhumanism means. So there are other interpretations, but this is my interpretation, and so just letting you know. The transhumanism is a branch of posthumanism. It's a branch of technological posthumanism that seeks to enhance and improve humanity using technology as a tool for human progress. And so transhumanists are optimistic, almost invariably. Some transhumanists envision a post-human future where our current biological limitations, such as disease and death, will be transcended by technological augmentation. They believe that. Some transhumanists believe that humans will come, death will be obsolete, disease will be obsolete. And this can be done through genetic engineering or cryonics or artificial intelligence. We'll find AGI and we'll develop that in such a way as to augment human capabilities or nanotechnology. So there's a variety of technological approaches, and all of these are promising, I suppose, but they're also kind of threatening in a way. And so some noted transhumanists like Ray Kurzweil or Hans Moravec or Zoltan Istvan, and these are a lot of people in tech. A lot of people in tech are transhumanists. They're very optimistic about the use of technology to enhance the human cognition and bodily function to go beyond current biological constraints. And some of this probably is true. So here's Ray Kurzweil. I've read many of his books. He's one of the most optimistic of the transhumanists. He says by the time we get to the 2040s, which is not all that far away, we'll be able to multiply human intelligence a billion-fold. That will be a profound change that's singular in nature. Computers are going to keep getting smaller and smaller. Ultimately, they will go inside our bodies and brains and make us healthier and make us smarter. Okay, maybe we'll destroy ourselves before then. I don't know, right? But Kurzweil is very optimistic. And there you go. What are some of the critical responses to posthumanism? What do the critics say about this? Well, loss of moral agency by Decentering the human subject, this undermines human agency. That is true. And therefore, it undermines personal responsibility. If humans are merely one actor among many in a vast network, how can moral responsibility and ethical decision making be meaningfully assigned? It can't. So one of two things happens. So this is the problem. This is really kind of what Nietzsche was saying. If there is no human subject, if autonomy doesn't matter, then there's no moral responsibility. So either there's nihilism, which is no meaning at all, or we developed a new type of ethics. Maybe it's based on authenticity, or I don't know. I have no idea, but we will need a new kind of ethics. Absolutely. There's an overemphasis on technology, some of the critics will say. Some critics see posthumanism as overly optimistic about technological enhancement, artificial intelligence, assuming that these developments will improve human life rather than exacerbate inequalities or create new ethical dilemmas. I think both are true. I think we will see great gains for humanity, but also there will be huge, huge problems, dramatic problems that have to be solved. Posthumanism might undermine human rights because it disregards values such as individual dignity, autonomy, and reason, which have historically been central to the ethical and political thinking underlying the idea of human rights. By moving away from human exceptionalism, posthumanism risks diminishing concepts like human rights, which have been foundational to legal and moral frameworks. Yes, I think this is true. And so it necessitates rethinking what these terms actually mean now. I think that is true. And there's a lot of ambiguity and theoretical vagueness about this stuff, folks. I mean, really, there is. I mean, I like reading Derrida, and I like the Baudrillard and Deleuze, and all of this stuff is great. Heidegger, Nietzsche, all of this stuff. But there's a lot of vagueness, and some of that vagueness makes you kind of, hey, what's really going on here? So some philosophers critique posthumanism for being conceptually vague, offering sweeping critiques of humanism without clearly defining its alternatives. It is sometimes accused of lacking practical applications, making it difficult to implement in fields like ethics, law, and governance. Yeah, I think that's legitimate. Some of this stuff is pretty out there and difficult to understand, and it works as theory, but it's hard to point to actual applications of what these people are talking about. Okay, yeah, I mean, that's a legitimate criticism. Post-humanist themes in literature and film. This is fun. Obviously, I've talked about Blade Runner. Blade Runner is a story of of replicants who look like they look human, but they're not human, and a bounty hunter who is charged with tracking down rogue replicants and killing them. This is a fantastic. Also, the sequel is fantastic. It's one of the few times where the sequel is worth actually seeing as much as the original. So if you're interested in this question of what makes us human, Blade Runner, really good place to start. Frankenstein, you guys weren't expecting this. Frankenstein, the first science fiction novel, Mary Shelley. It's a novella, really. Folks, if you have not read this, you should read it. If you've just seen the movie or you kind of like have a pop cultural understanding of Frankenstein's monster, this novella is fantastic. It's the first post-humanist novel. And Shelley challenges traditional humanist ideas about identity, agency, and the boundary between being human and non-human. Victor Frankenstein embodies Enlightenment humanist ideas of reason and progress, yet his arrogance, his hubris leads to suffering and destruction. This is a fantastic read. Don't dismiss it. It's great. And it's a short read. Lots of good ideas in it. The Matrix is a post-humanist film. Okay. The film poses the question, what does it mean to be human when all of reality is controlled and manipulated by super intelligent machines? Okay, the Wachowskis read Baudrillard. They did. Hyper reality right here in this film. And Descartes. Ghost in the Shell. Okay, some of you probably appreciate this. The protagonist is almost entirely cybernetic with only a human brain. This challenges the humanist idea of an essential biological human nature. If a person's body is entirely synthetic, are they still human? Don't know. Probably not. Annihilation, Jeff Vandermeer. This is a fantastic novel, and there's a movie adaptation that is actually pretty good. Mysterious alien force that alters DNA of all living things, leading to hybrids of humans, animals, and plants. This challenges the humanist idea that humans are separate from and superior to nature. So here, the nature of humanity is not fixed and stable, but it's constantly evolving in unpredictable ways. Very good. Blind Sight. This is a novel by Peter Watts. This is fantastic. This is one of my, if you're into science fiction, read this. A group of heavily augmented post-humans attempt to make first contact with alien life. And what they find is a form of intelligence that causes them to question the very nature of consciousness itself. This is such a great novel, and it's relatively unknown. And if you're into science fiction, don't miss this novel. All right. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. And I really do appreciate you hanging out here. And if you enjoyed this material, there's another bonus lecture on accelerationism. And accelerationism is another post-humanist movement.